Hello, welcome to Nothing is Wrong with You book podcast. Thrilled to have you here with us today. As always, we start with what we're currently reading. So I'm going to hand it over to Athena. What are you reading right now?
I am reading a lot of things at once. I'm in that kind of phase where I've just got like, so I picked one that I'm really enjoying, and it's a memoir called "With Darkness Came Stars" by Audrey Flack, and it's a big book because she is a visual artist. She does photorealism. I recommend looking up. It's a great book. She has had a really interesting life, and I recommend it. That's all I got. Yeah,
Nice.
yeah, I'm really enjoying it.
That one out. All right, Colleen, what are you currently reading?
Mine is also a memoir after I abandoned two others that I was 3/4 of the way through.
Ooh, I
So
want to
this is
hear.
open third time is the charm. So I am reading P by Alexandra Fuller. Alexandra Fuller. I've loved her other work. I know I'm late to the party, but it finally came into the library. So I'm tiny bit way in, and I'm getting reacquainted with her prose style. So yeah, it's so far so good. I'm not quite sure I'm in the psychological space to read a story about this right now, but we'll see because it's got to go back to the library.
Yeah. Will you?
So I'm ready or not, here we come.
Yeah. Are you allowed to tell us what you abandoned? I'm always interested in what was like not working.
I can. I abandoned two memoirs that have been on lots of top lists for 2024.
Okay.
The one is Splinters by Leslie Jameson. She wrote
Yeah.
the empathy exams.
I left it too.
Oh my God.
Yep.
I feel so validated. All right, that's another episode, so we're not going to
Yep.
talk about
I
that.
did
There's
the
nothing
same.
wrong with you.
There's nothing wrong with you either.
Yep.
I felt kind of guilty about that one for sure.
Me
Because
too.
everybody's like, you're going to love it. I'm like, I don't love it. I really don't
Nope.
love it.
I didn't
And then
either.
the other one is, I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of it. It's something like Nobody Can Get Out of Here or something like that. But it's about a woman whose mother has schizophrenia. And I was like kind of like all in both of these books. And then I wasn't, I don't know. The voice wasn't there for me. This could all be me as well. And maybe I shouldn't have tried to read those back to back. And I'm hoping that I don't bring that into Alexandra and it's not her fault. And it's not their fault. Like those books they're really good. They're just like not where I'm at. And I'm having a fiction rut. So anybody who's listening right now, if that happens to you, like I had so many good fiction books and now I'm like, oh, I don't know what to read yet. So I'm just kind of trying to get work done, wrap up grades, and then I'll turn to something.
I like it.
There's a new Joanne Harris book that I got from the library, and I do really love her. So I'm kind of hoping maybe that jumpstarts me.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Cool. Thank you. I was curious.
I feel validated. Yeah.
Yes,
so
that's
we'll
amazing.
talk about that too.
Yep, same.
The whole purpose of the podcast.
I love when we're like surprised by other things that we've kind of been go about. So
that's amazing.
Yeah. So I love Alexandra Fuller. I love the world she takes you to. So we'll see.
Yeah. Cool. How about you, Rebecca?
I currently have 3 books, technically 4 if you count my audiobook. My audiobook is the island on the Cerulean Sea or something like that. Something like that.
Go ahead.
It was out there for a while and people were talking about it for a while, and so I was feeling like I'll just stick it on my Libby.
I'll do some recon while you're talking.
Okay. I'll stick it on my Libby list, and when it shows up, it shows up. So it just did, which is great. I'm halfway through.
Cool.
I'm also reading Invisible Strings. This is the 113 Poets Respond to the Songs of Taylor Swift. A fascinating story about this. I heard about it from actually Lauren Camp. I reviewed her book, Took House in 2020 for Minerva Rising. And so I followed her on Instagram and Facebook and stuff. And she mentioned this book. And I was just like, oh, yeah, I didn't really think much about it the first time I saw it. And then she kept posting about it. And I was like, oh, that sounds really interesting. So I pre-ordered it, picked it up from my local bookstore. And while I was there, this older couple, and I would assume that they were a couple, but maybe they were just friends. Who knows? But this woman was like, look at this, like this book of poetry based on the response to Taylor Swift songs. And the guy's like, I don't know any Taylor Swift songs. And she's like, neither do I, but I like these poets. And so she was buying it. I think in some ways it's working both ways. the idea and reading the introduction is like basically Taylor Swift started talking about poetry. Let's get poetry out there to the masses. Let's like all kind of create an anthology to introduce new poets. And for me, that I've already found some new poets that I love so much. One of them I actually sent to Athena, which is New Zealand Aotearoa poet that now lives in the UK. Anyway,
very cool.
But then it is also getting people who are into the poetry into Taylor Swift, like from that couple that was in the bookstore. Anyway, interesting view of how things are crossing over there. Another one, this is one that came to me, how books come to you, that you don't really know why you're supposed to read it, but you're supposed to read it. I picked this up at a used bookstore here in Bellingham after we came back from Scotland, and I had this whole thing with Iona and from a different book I was reading, Crossing the Avalon. And this is Sea Room. It is an Island Life in the Hebrides by Adam Nicolson. Sorry, my light's kind of like on
That's
there.
all right.
And so I'm not far into this one, but it's interesting, the idea of what it's like to live in an island in the Hebrides, or it's a very interesting conversation about ownership and land.
Should I know what the Hebrides is? I mean, I know I can spell it, but I'm geographically lost here. I know how to spell it and I know how to pronounce it, but I'm actually not sure where we are geographically.
They're like the little islands up towards like Scotland, like
Wales. I was gonna guess Wales. So Scotland.
Okay. Scotland. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. No, good clarification
for our listeners.
No, I needed it too.
To be like, I don't know what the Hebrides is.
Yeah, well, so this is one of those things, right? Like when we were there, we were just recently in Scotland. I was returning to some places when I was there, when I was when I was 19. And I was never up into the Highlands, and that's where we were. And this whole idea of the Highlands and the Hebrides was like weighing on me. And so I think that's why it came to me. I don't know. Anyway.
Yeah.
The other book I'm reading is Kataraina by Becky Manawatu. Is that right? No.
That looks
right. Manawatu. This is a New Zealand Aotearoa author. I was just digging into it today, and I'm already pretty far into it. So talking about good fiction, I'm loving it. So anyway,
Kataraina. Very cool. Yay!
I'm inspired.
Yeah.
I think maybe what's going to happen next is this book that's right behind me, James. I need to get on the James band.
Oh, so good.
I'm going to get back seeing it. I'm like, the universe is providing. Literally, it's right there when I'm going to read.
Yeah.
It's there you go. I love that. Yeah.
Good. So did everybody else, evidently.
Yeah, I know.
And all the lists and all the rewards and all the things. Clearly.
So speaking about books that everyone loves, again, the heart of this podcast. So sometimes those books either resonate with us or don't, and there's nothing wrong with you if a book that's popular doesn't resonate with you. And today we are talking about Elizabeth Gilbert's Eat, Pray, Love. Interesting fact on this, I've never read it. I was shocked this week to find that I had the book. I was shelving something else in my bookshelf, and I realized it was there. And I was mentioning to Colleen earlier that it has a little blue dot on it, and that's when I know that it's on my bookshelf, but I haven't read it. So I believe I picked this up from the Bellingham Library, book sale that they have like throughout the year at some point when I used to volunteer there and got credits. Anyway, so this is what we're talking about. So full disclosure, I have not read this. I finally watched the movie like this year because of the memes or the little clips that were going out on social media about eating the pizza. Just eat the pizza. Don't worry about your body image or whatever. So I don't even know if that's part of the book. But you all have thoughts. So I would like to hear your thoughts on Eat, Pray, Love. And randomly, I tend to be a person like when everyone's talking about it I purposely don't read it then.
Yeah. I'm surprised you read
Same thing with movies. Like I just go, nope. And often I come to them later anyway, but yeah. So again, I don't know if it had anything to do with the book itself. I think it was just like when it came out, it was everywhere.
Yeah.
which I think was my initial like, nope, not going there.
And I was like all in. So that I used to run a yoga book club, and that was the first book we did. It was at a gym called Slender Lady. So we jokingly called ourselves the Slender Ladies Book Club, which is ridiculous. Clearly, a man named that gym franchise.
Sorry.
So I remember us all sitting there reading this book. So I kind of was coming up as a yoga teacher at the same time that book was really popular. And so I've had a kind of long relationship with the book, and I can kind of jump in and out, but I can just say, so in the beginning, I really did love that book. And I wonder if you went back and read it now that the hype is settled down and things are quieter, if you would like it. The main criticism that I didn't even have, but I should have had, I think, was that there was no place in which she acknowledged the privilege that she had to be able to do the things that she talks about. But I initially really loved the part that she was in India, and the world is a different place now. I think people are more sensitive about situating yourself and your subject position in books, maybe because of a book like Eat, Pray, Love, and how so many people were saying, I don't have that privilege. And the thing that really amplified that for me was one of my yoga students, Gwen, who was just lovely and beautiful, and had a terminal illness. And so she read the book and she was like, what if I can't, like, she was tearing up and she's like, I can't do this thing to find myself. So where does that leave me? And that really struck a chord. And having followed Elizabeth Gilbert's career, I think she would be the first person that would want to kind of take Gwen, in her arms and be with her. But yeah, there's more things I'll talk about, but I want to hear from Athena too. So that was my first entry point into that book and that story.
Yeah, I love Elizabeth Gilbert. I
Same. Oh,
follow
same. Yes,
Yeah,
same.
like I follow her on Instagram, and I think some of the stuff recently that her quotes like about just living life and letting go, and how we, you know what I mean, letting go of what we can't control, like beautiful, really thoughtful. I say same reaction. I haven't read it again since it originally came out. I think I'd have to read it again now, but I couldn't get past the the money to do what she was doing. Like I had a lot of trouble even then. I was reading it like I would connect with this so much more if she was able to go within her community and find ways to eat, pray, and love like where she was, because it's really incredibly beautiful what she did. But same, I was like, she was able to kind of take this time almost off of life. And I remember in the moment thinking, I can't do that with my family, with my job, with money. Like, there's no way that I could just, you know what I mean? So it was hard for me. Like, it distracted me. I felt like you're saying, like, the privilege of being able to do that took away from the message for me at that time. But I wonder what it would be like to go back to it now, you know, and revisit that and see. Not that I'm like in such a place where I'm like, well, now I can do that. But like, I just wonder if it would hit me any differently. But I had a lot, I couldn't get past that, you know, so
And
it's
maybe it's
interesting.
because we know her more. Maybe it's because we all
Yeah.
know Elizabeth Gilbert more. Like, I
Yeah.
love her. The Signature of All Things is one of my favorite books. I
Yeah.
actually can't believe it didn't end up on any of my lists. I was thinking about it today.
Yeah.
Um, I love that book. I loved the book she wrote about, I think it was like the Roaring Twenties. I love her book on creativity, and I really love her. And
Yeah.
so
Me too.
I think that says a lot, right?
Yeah.
That even if we read that and we felt, I did not feel like, I really was like, this is so cool. Like, she traveled and she did all these things, um, and I needed somebody else to point out the privilege embedded in it. And honestly, now as a person who does sensitivity readings, I would point out and I would say, you need to put a note somewhere in here about where this money came from, which is, I think
Yes.
she got an advance. I think she got an advance maybe on the book. If
Okay. Okay.
that seems very specific for me to be making up. So somewhere in my brain, that's where the money came from.
Yeah.
And to watch her evolve as a human, it
Hmm.
has been so interesting. So I think I'm probably willing to forgive some of the stuff just because that was 2010, it had to have been 2010,
Yeah.
2006. How old is this book now? It might
Yeah.
be
How
20
old is
years
it?
old.
What,
Actually, it
what?
might be 20 years old.
Yeah. How old is it,
The
Rebecca?
world is different now. So I think
Yeah.
the book would be different. And I'm going to tell you what, I think
Yeah.
Elizabeth Gilbert would be the first person to say
Yeah.
that book would be different. She was
Yeah.
just interviewed by Mike Birbiglia a few weeks
Yep.
ago from his Working It Out podcast.
I love working it out.
And such a great interview because she talks about how that book became something else.
Yeah.
And that really she didn't think anybody was going to read it. And then like people would be critiquing it. And she was just like, you are not the audience for this book. Like, but
Yeah.
because like Rebecca said, everybody was reading it, it felt like
Right.
everybody could own it.
Yeah.
And not really. Like
Yeah.
I really maybe should go back and read some of it because I did really like some of the India part. Like I remember the part where she was like letting herself get stung by mosquitoes. And the
Hmm.
reason I remember that is because she's like, this was not some kind of like amazing sacrifice. It was the moment where she pointed out that she was
Yeah.
uncomfortable, but she wasn't like suffering.
Yeah.
So I think just watching her, because I am a huge champion of her work.
Yeah.
So, we've kind of talked about authors where we loved them and then it's dissolved a bit. But this, to me, in some ways, is the opposite. Like, I'm glad she wrote that book because then she was able to do all the other things she wrote, which I love a lot more.
Yeah. Yep.
So this came
Well,
out in 2006, the first
Okay,
one.
okay.
so it's almost 20 years old,
It
right? The
was
world is a
republished later on by
very
Penguin
different
as
thing.
2007, which is probably when it gained its huge
Yeah.
Yeah.
notoriety, or people were pulling it out, right? It was 2007.
Yeah. Yep.
It is, it has not, I think Elizabeth Gilbert would be the first person to say it has not withstood, some
Yeah.
of the cultural changes, and those are cultural changes that she would celebrate.
Hmm.
So it is an
Yeah.
interesting example of somebody that created a work, it kind of became its own thing, and then like Rebecca saw that meme. I never saw that, but I remember being in bed on bed rest and watching the movie with
Yeah.
Julia Roberts, right? Like how ridiculous Julia Roberts was the person they chose for that. But
Yeah.
it became a whole thing. It can
Right.
become a whole thing beyond the book. And that
Yeah.
this is the perfect example. Like, so if I can tell one more story about this,
Yeah.
in the Mike Birbiglia interview, she was telling the story about being at like TSA or immigration, coming in, and somebody recognized her name, and the immigration officer called the other immigration officers over and was like, this is the Eat Pray Love lady. And he said he did that because they said at least once a day one of them has somebody say, what were you doing out of the country? And they reference Eat Pray Love. So Elizabeth Gilbert's like, I just want to get in the country. And they like, everybody was freaking out because this thing has become way beyond what
Yeah.
she ever imagined. I just thought that was such a cute story. Like they were like,
Yeah.
oh, you're the Eat Pray Love lady? And also
Yeah.
liability on a career if you
Yeah.
become the Eat Pray Love lady. And how she was
Right.
able to combat that is really
Amazing.
impressive.
Yeah, it is. No, yeah. And I remember at the time thinking, why isn't anyone else talking about what it takes to be able to do this kind of,
Mhm.
you know what I mean? So that's
Yeah.
what I remember thinking that. So it's interesting when you say, Colleen, like now, like, you know what I mean? How there
Oh,
should
I
be
would
a
have never
little,
let her get away with that. I would have been like,
yeah,
you need to deal with this in a forward, or you need to
yeah,
point this out.
right. When I also like, like, again, I want to go back and you know how I feel about Elizabeth Gilbert. Like, I love her. Um, I would like to read it again. I also like, like just like spiritual beliefs, you know, like the Buddha and the washing of the dishes kind of thing, where it's like,
Mm-hmm.
be where you are, heal here now. I believe in travel and the importance of travel. Oh my gosh, don't get me wrong. And I love to travel, but I also think it's powerful when you can kind of, you don't have to leave to find some of those things. You know what I mean? So I think
Yeah,
at the
and I
time
think she
too.
did that. She did that
Yes,
exact thing then. Like she
yes,
lives on the just on the other side of the river from me, and
yeah, yep,
like a very quiet life. Like
yep,
she really just has a super quiet life now. I mean, she
yeah,
travels, and I love when she traveled, she wore like the same shirt every single day and made a
yep,
point to be like, this is the same blue shirt from yesterday and tomorrow,
yeah,
and I wash it every night. Like I like
yep,
that she is leaning into that simplicity of herself, but the
yeah,
book is not that at all. Or maybe it
no,
is, and we just 20 years ago was a very different way of thinking about
yeah,
yoga, meditation, body image,
yeah,
um, divorce,
Privilege.
right, and exactly, and
yeah,
privilege. No
yeah,
one, there weren't blogs that people were going to write all about how this book doesn't acknowledge privilege, right?
right,
Weren't
right,
those things weren't in place. So everybody was having a real individual reaction to the book, but there wasn't a lot of like collective opportunities other than a book club,
right,
uh, where you might have that conversation, and which I did, and grew because of
yeah,
that, very
yep,
much so.
Yeah, and
yeah,
I think some of those conversations did start happening after this,
Yeah.
obviously, because it didn't happen at
yeah,
that time. And I wonder how much, and not to lay so much on Elizabeth Gilbert on that, but I wonder how much it just came from this too, right? Like, and books that were doing the similar thing at the same time of, wait, how did that happen? Because
Mhm.
we, a long time ago, had a book club that we just randomly would read a book, the three of us with, and it was actually another friend of ours, Chelsea. We looked at Wintering. Um,
yeah,
we all loved the book, all loved it, but I was like, but we don't have universal health care to just have off from work, like, like there, I couldn't do this, and so that was to your point, Athena. It's like I couldn't do this, and so it's interesting that when we read these books that give us insights to ways to grow, develop. Again, I haven't read this, so I don't really know what happens in it fully, except unless it was in the movie. But as we come to develop ourselves as individuals, we often think we need to be able to go do X. We need to go travel. We need to go experience a year off from work, whatever those things might mean. And because that's who's writing the books that we're reading that are showing us that. And I think what I'm trying to say here is that you don't always have to do that, and you are who you are, and you are where you are. But I think it's when we get into space of a book, we want to put ourselves in that place, right? It's interesting that we come to those conclusions when we can't live the life that we're seeing in the book. When
Right, we're not
hmm,
obligated to, right? We're
right,
not, and the writer is not obligated to produce that
correct.
either,
right,
is what
But
she
it's
was saying.
interesting, like as readers, you're like, well, I couldn't do that. So it's just interesting that my own reflection that I sometimes have those moments of like I
hmm,
couldn't just travel around the world for a year. Um,
hmm,
so, but why does that matter?
Well, right,
yeah,
because I'm thinking about this fee. I'm thinking about Alexandra Fuller's book. I'm like, I'm not going to have that experience. I'm not
Yeah.
at
yeah,
all going to have that experience. So why did I require that of Elizabeth Gilbert? And again, I was happy to read it because I was like, this would be my perfect life.
yeah,
Um, and what I also love about the book is then she wrote a book about being married that comes out of that, Eat, Pray, Love, and then they got divorced, right? And like
hmm,
her life is messy. And I
yeah,
think people were imposing perfection upon something, and she was the first, would be now the first person. Like I think it even says it in the book. She says to him, "Can I write about you?"
right,
And he says, "I don't want you to." And she literally says, "No one reads my books. You don't have to worry about it."
right,
So I don't know if that's an Eat, Pray, Love or the marriage book, but like
yeah,
she didn't have any, and she is the
yeah,
last person that thought, some publisher kind of attached to that story and then exported it out, and then opens it up to all the criticism, some of which is
yeah,
totally appropriate.
yeah,
um, and it became something totally different. Like, I remember when she wrote Signature of All Things, and people were like, well, this isn't Eat, Pray, Love. And she was like, yeah, I know. I'm a writer. Like,
Right.
this is what I wanted to write about. Like, Ada and her moss. Is that her name? It's all about moss. I remember that. But
yeah.
So
it's such a
interesting.
different book. And she really, I encourage people to maybe go watch that interview with Mike Birbiglia, because she talks so much about what this book became and how she has like basically no ownership of it anymore.
Yeah.
So there's maybe us talking about it is the perfect example of like, she doesn't have any control. I guess no writer does, but when it becomes a phenomena, you really have no control.
Like you think about Cheryl Strayed, Wild is another one that kind of is in the same realm in some way, right? There's people doing the trail here just because she did it, right? Like, and you're like, okay.
But that inclination, right, with Walden, there is that inclination where you read something where somebody's trying to find themselves, and we all kind of want to find our own selves, and then we're like, well, what is this a template? Like, is this a template? Without recognizing we all have to find our own templates.
Well,
that inclination maybe is always there, that, oh, I read this thing, so maybe it'll work for me.
Yeah. I mean, and my memoir is on like becoming and belonging, right? Like it's the same, like I think everyone's looking for that. I just think, to your point, sometimes people think, oh, they found the answer and I just need to do what they did to find the answer. And maybe you do in that space. Maybe the Eat, Pray, Love people that were going through the airport like did experience the same thing, but the likelihood that it's the same is very minimal, because it's you in that space.
Yeah.
Although I would like to be given the opportunity. I'd be fine if somebody said, would you like to go and act?
I know.
Love, and I'd be like, you mean I get to go to Italy, and then I get to go to India, and then I get to go to Bali? Sure, that sounds great.
I know.
But this, and I think 20 years ago too, this kind of memoir about a woman finding herself was not nearly as common as it is now. So maybe that opened some doors too. And so I feel like there's the critique of the book and then the thinking about all the things that it led to, this kind of historical idea of it. Because she really does. She like fetishizes meditation and yoga. I can name that. And there's some there's orientalizing of things, that concept from Said. Like I can, as a scholar, totally see the problems, and I'm sure there's all kinds of think pieces that were about that. Yeah. But also, I think it meant things to people, and maybe it opened some doors, and I think that's fine. I don't have my copy. We were laughing because I don't have a copy of this book.
I don't either.
And I'm the only person that has.
That's what I think is so funny, right? Like, Athena and I read it. I got rid of my copy of that book a long time ago. I was like, I don't need this.
Yeah,
and
same.
You have it, right? And you have it, right?
I didn't even know I had it.
I think it is funny that you had it and we don't.
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
Are you going to read it, Rebecca?
No.
That's why do you have it? Like, I don't know that you should.
I think it was, of all the books I have to read, this is most likely going to a local free library now, because I didn't even know I had it. Like, I didn't even know it.
Yeah.
And I probably picked it up just because of, how it's fit into the culture, where like the reading culture, like everyone's read this kind of thing. It's like, what do you mean you haven't read it? But
this is probably the most popular book we will talk about on the podcast. If I had to guess, like just the most mainstream bestseller, millions of copies. I mean, Julia Roberts played her, which Elizabeth Gilbert thinks is ridiculous.
Yeah.
So that should tell us something about what we want to see in this story.
Well, I think this, I could be totally wrong, but I feel that this is also around the time, like, I think this created more of a phenomenon just than people like reading it and traveling in the movie. But I think this is the time people started putting like words like this around their house.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? Like,
God. Ugh.
I mean, I am not one of them. Obviously, we're all rolling our eyes, but I think this is right. Like, this is when people started putting this in their house.
Yeah.
It is such a simplistic title that it was not something I think there's so much. It would actually be a really, if anybody has written a dissertation about this, I would love to know the cultural phenomena of that book, because it has imprinted so many things. And it probably, I think Wild came after Eat, Pray, Love, right? Like it probably opened the door for some of that very specific, right? White women finding themselves journeys. There's plenty of these that are not written by white women that have not enjoyed the same success. So, but she was perfectly marketable at the time. She was adorable. She was gregarious. She was in love with the person that, and married the person that is at the end of the book. So it was not, she doesn't feel ownership of that book anymore. Like she very much just feels like she thinks it's sillier than anybody, than all of us. Like, I think that was the takeaway from the interview that I watched with her.
Yeah.
Deep in a writing time.
I know, I'm just thinking. I'm still not over the gym called Slender Ladies.
Oh, Slender Ladies. Slender Ladies.
Oh no.
Yeah, so it was, I thought, so that's the perfect example. This book was an extraordinary thing to come out. I think I started the book club because of this book.
Yeah.
Because I was like, this seems like a really cool book for people to read all together in a yoga community. And then I ran a yoga book club for like 10 more years. So again, it opened a door and we got deeper, way deeper into like meatier things about things that she discusses. But maybe it opened some doors that if people were willing to open themselves up and not fall into the like weird fetishization, which is what a lot of us love doing. I don't like that book at all. Like, I mean, that's what's so interesting to me, is that I don't like the book, but I like what it has maybe been in my life. I don't know. I think that there's something to be said about her and watching her career.
Yep. I agree.
She's probably our age-ish.
Yeah, I wonder.
She might be knocking on 60. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But I love, like, her head is shaved. She's got these big chunky glasses now. Like, she had this beautiful relationship with her friend Raina for a while.
Yep.
She's so kind of messily open and
human.
So, I don't know.
Sorry, I don't have much more to say. I feel bad.
How do we like it? Did we just subvert the real purpose of the podcast?
Well, I think in some of it's interesting, right? The idea that I didn't even read it. I have the book. You guys have read it, but don't have the book. Like, and what it brought to culture, what it brought to understanding, what it brought to reading. I mean, I'm sure there's a whole bunch of book club movements that happened because of it, to your point as well, right? That people then were reading other things. So I don't know. I mean, I guess we're saying it's okay that if you don't like it, but it did have these repercussions or like ripple effect in ways that have been beneficial, even if we don't like the book anymore.
I can hold both things, right?
Yeah.
I can hold that a community in my own life came out from it, and I can hold at the same time Gwen beating herself up because she felt like she didn't have access to this, so could never do it. Like both of those things can be true at the same time, which is why I was so interested in thinking about this book and how it has been in my world and in my life. And, you know, the business that she and her husband started was next to my favorite restaurant, again, on the other side of the river. Like, she's here and she's part of that community. And then it went out of business, right? Like, perfect example, went out of business, marriage failed, went out of business, business. There's a lot to be said about the humanity of it, but the undeniable privilege that goes completely unrecognized is a hard one for me to overcome. And I give her a lot of credit. Like, she wrote a whole novel. It was about to come out, and Russia invaded Ukraine, and her novel was set in Russia, had nothing to do with anything that was happening. And she got letters from people in Ukraine, and she pulled it. Like, I can't even imagine, first of all, the financial ability to do that, but also just like this thing that you've created that's about to come out into the world that really is not at all the context of this thing, but like to me that's incredible integrity.
Yeah.
And so she was young when she wrote Eat, Pray, Love. She was figuring it out. We're all still figuring it out. But like that she did that, and that she wrote that other book, God, what is it called? It's about the 20s, and it was such a good book to read on the beach, and it wasn't that good.
Yeah.
And she was
What's
like,
it
it
called?
isn't that good. I don't have to write something good every single
Yeah.
time. I wanted to write this book. And I just,
Yeah.
I really do appreciate her for
Yeah.
those things.
Yeah.
But she wouldn't be able to do all those things if Eat, Pray, Love didn't exist.
Right. The advantages she got from all of how it got connected and it
absolutely. The
went
money.
up, right?
Let's be clear.
Yeah.
The money.
Yeah.
Right? Let's be clear. The money. It all comes down to the money. And that's why she is able to do all these things. That is why she is able to not have all of her eggs in the basket of that novel that got pulled at the last minute.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
So I think part of this, and we've had other discussions on this, sometimes it feels like if there was one sentence in the book that just recognized, I realize most people won't be able to take a whole year off of your life. I acknowledge that, even if it's in the acknowledgments, to just say like, I got a grant or I got this, right? I think sometimes can alleviate that tension that readers could have as they're reading it, to be like, how is this even possible?
Yeah.
I wouldn't let her write that book. If I were her editor now, and I don't think any editor now would let her not acknowledge that, because that can completely dive bomb a book before it even comes out, as we know.
Yeah.
So I don't love that book, but I do love some of the cultural elements of it, and I do really appreciate that the other work that Elizabeth Gilbert has offered us.
I agree.
So maybe if we think about like how I felt about Barbara Kingsolver, like super, super important, and then kind of decrescendoed, like maybe this was an opportunity to crescendo in life and watch her as an artist, because I have learned a lot from her as a creative person.
Yeah. Agreed.
All right.
Okay.
Any final thoughts on that, Athena? Are we ready to move on, or?
I just think also when I think about my work, working with first generation low income and, students now too, it's like, I know not every book is for everybody, of course, right? But I'm often trying to think of like, what would I hand easily over and go, check this out. Like this will connect with you, whether it's something just poetic language or an inspiring story. And there is like spiritual work for me that I could see connecting with some of my students, you know what I mean, that are in certain situations where I feel like I couldn't hand them this book. It would just be absurd to be like, I just like, I can't describe it. It just wouldn't feel right to be like, read this. They'd be like, what?
Which is what women were doing, and it was only women, and it was only white women, probably. It was a very specific type of woman that was being spoken to,
right? And so that's I think
I've never assigned this book. I've never once considered like I wouldn't. It would be very low on my list of books that I would recommend to people, but I would recommend Signature of All Things, and I think everybody should read it. And her book about creativity is really valuable. I've listened to that book several times on one speed, 1 times 1 speed, Rebecca, not times 3 speed. I've listened to it when I've driven a few times. It's kind of like I go back to it because I really do like what she says.
Yep. Cool.
All right, so we've shared with you what we're reading. We've talked to you a little bit about Eat, Pray, Love, and now we're into the part where we are going to share a recommendation. So this one, I'm gonna let Athena kind of share because she's the one that got us all to read it in the first place. But we are looking at Letters from Max, a book of friendship by Sarah Ruhl and Max.
My cover's different.
Ritvo. Oh, hardcover.
This is
Yours is paperback.
Paperback.
Yeah.
Yours hardcover.
Yeah.
I have 3 copies. I have hardback, softback, and I have an advanced reader's copy because I love it so much. It's obsessive and weird. I don't know
Which is why you are going to share why this book is amazing and everyone should read it.
It's just gorgeous. Okay, first of all, Sarah Ruhl, I love her so much. Like everything I read from her, I love. All of her books.
Smile.
What's that?
smile.
I know, come on. Like, it's just really beautifully done. I love the way she writes. And this is such a gorgeous book of, I don't even know, Rebecca. Just, it's
Can you
hard
say
for
what
me to,
it's about? Can you
yes,
summarize
okay.
the book?
Yes, I can. It's about a student. Sarah Ruhl is the professor at Yale. Max is her student who is very ill. And this is a series of letters between, I'm trying to just like simplify, between them as he goes through this illness and as just his creative path as well. I don't know. Like I'm not as good as you both are at summarizing but the power of these letters, the beauty of the letters, the relationship is amazing. And she's learning as much from writing with him as he is from her. So it's this gorgeous, like, teacher student switching roles and just so beautiful. I loved it. I just love this book. What do you think? Is that a decent summary?
Hmm?
I don't know.
And then
I love
Rebecca
it.
read it. Do you want to talk? And
Yeah,
then you
then I
read it.
read it, had a very similar experience, right? Of saying, oh, it's gorgeously written. I have like all my little tabs in there
Oh,
of things that stood out to me. Um, and I think, it's also creates that space of, as a teacher, right, and in a relationship with students, but then also this idea of when and how we're learning, and what we're learning from, and the ways that we can create and be creative, and how that is part of the story of our life as well. And and just thinking about what we've just been talking about, right? Like, be where you are, whatever that circumstance is, you can still become, develop, explore yourself, in different ways. And so I thought that it was just like a little kind of love story in a way, but not in the typical what you
hmm
think of as a love story.
yeah, I love
And then
that.
you both mentioned it on maybe the first episode. How did that happen? I don't remember.
I
But
don't
I remember I wrote
remember.
it down and I was like, well, clearly I have to read this. I think I maybe ordered it the moment the podcast ended. Because I loved Smile and I really liked the way Sarah Ruhl writes. And the thing, it says letters from Max, a poet, a teacher, a friendship. But the thing that I remember most from reading it just a few weeks ago, months ago, is I feel like it should say mother there too, because so much of this is about her being a parent and trying to figure out how to be there for Max and how to have the energy for Max and her family and
hmm
her students. And like, this is a thing that I very deeply feel, which is probably why those parts I remember so much. I mean, there were some times where I was like, I need her to acknowledge how she's able to do that. Like, does she have a nanny? Like, how is she doing this?
Yeah.
But I did appreciate some of those parts about how he gets to know her kids um, uh, and just the loss of him, just how
hmm
smart he was. Um, Often way too esoteric for me. Like, there were parts where I was like, I don't know what they're talking about, like, metaphysical things that they would be talking about. And I think it got made into a musical. Did it get made into a play or something?
Yeah, it's a play now.
Okay. I
Yep.
think that would be really lovely to see. So I absolutely think it was worth the time. I think it's, the fact that Athena started it and that we all got on the bandwagon and we're all willing to say we still really loved it. Um,
Yay.
yeah, I think this, like, to me, this book is like a gift. Like, it's just such a lovely creation for so many people.
Yeah. Hey.
So that is a good book to
Yeah.
recommend out into the world. And maybe it's something, I mean, well, I don't know. I mean, we can say what happens, right?
Yeah,
Like,
I think
not
so.
right. He dies. So
Yeah.
that's happening, right? So the
Yeah.
whole time there's this sadness that just permeates the book whenever his voice comes in and you see him starting to live his life and find joy, and you're just like, I know this is not going to end well.
Yeah.
And his mother too. I really do
hmm
feel like maybe they lost something with leaving out the mothering part, because his
hmm
mother is so important too to
hmm
this book.
Yeah. Yep. That's a good
So
point.
that's my only critique,
Yeah.
and that's for the publishers, not that's for Milkweed, not for
Yeah.
Sarah Ruhl.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's so interesting too, of like how you come to the book,
Yeah.
right? Um, Yeah, and like we've been talking about that, right? We all come to the book
That's
differently.
probably the theme of this episode, right? Like, what do you bring
Yeah.
into a memoir? I'm trying to think back. Is this the first memoir we've talked about? It is. I think this is the first memoir where this is like a whole episode about memoir. We've recommended memoir, but I think this might be a whole episode about memoir.
Right.
Correct.
Starting with the two I abandoned.
Yeah.
But
Interesting.
there might be something different about what you bring.
How you enter a memoir kind of is different to how you enter fiction. It's
something for us to continue to think about, and hopefully people are thinking about as they listen to this conversation that really I just like having with the two of you. And I hope somebody's out there listening, but I really just like talking to you guys about books.
Yes, this is just fun for us.
Really people along the ride.
Yeah, exactly.
Getting to talk about books more, because we all do all the time. I know you two go on walks. Rebecca and I talk about books on our weekly chats, and so it's nice for it to all come together. But I think this is the first one where we've talked all about memoir.
Yeah. Which is interesting because we read memoir a lot.
So much. And I would say that that's what I write. And the book that I was trying to remember earlier was No One Gets to Fall Apart by Sarah Labrie. Labrie. I'm not sure how to say it, but yeah. So, I mean, I finished Eat, Pray, Love. I didn't for once think about not finishing it. So there's something to that too.
Yep. Agreed.
But you were also teaching it as a book club. And I think at some point, like if I think back to 2006, 2007, I was still that reader of like, I have to read this.
I was thinking that too. Is that just who I was at the time?
Yeah. I wouldn't be like,
the number of people, I want to say this right now. The point of this, what us started, is it's okay to stop reading a book. I have had 3 conversations with people in the time since we've recorded where they were miserable. They were like, oh, I have to finish this book. I have to finish this book. I'm like, no, you don't. No, you don't. No one's assigning you your pleasure books. You don't have to read it.
No.
So please, I'm so glad I've gotten to say out loud or like on Instagram, to people, like, stop. If you don't like it, just stop.
Don't read it.
Even if you bought it. I always push forward a little more if I bought it.
I know, same.
Someone else will read it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, that was a delight.
All right. Yes. Thank you for joining us today on this podcast. And we hope you are enjoying these episodes, and that if you are, please give us a like and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. So thanks again.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.